The thunderous roar of the muddy Arkansas River echoed through the valley as Sophia Vallejo clung desperately to what remained of her family's general store porch. The spring flood of 1874 had come with no warning, transforming the peaceful town of Riverton, Colorado, into a violent sea of debris and destruction. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, gripped the splintered wood as the current tried to claim her like it had claimed everything else she loved. Papa. Sophia screamed, her voice drowned by the merciless waters. Just hours ago, they'd been preparing for another ordinary day at Vallejo Mercantile. Now her father was gone, swept away before her eyes while trying to rescue their ledger books, the last testament to 15 years of hard work since they'd immigrated from Spain. When the waters finally receded 3 days later, Sophia stood amid the ruins of her life. At 22, she was alone, orphaned, and destitute. The flood had taken everything: her father, their store, their modest home behind it, and every penny they'd saved. All she had left were the sodden clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck. Riverton would rebuild towns, always did, but Sophia couldn't bear to stay where every street corner held memories of her father's hearty laugh or her mother's fragrant cooking before consumption had taken her 2 winters prior. With nothing left to lose, she sold the muddy plot of land that had once been her family's livelihood to the banker for a pittance enough for a stagecoach ticket west and perhaps a fresh start. "Weaverville, madam?" the ticket agent had asked skeptically when she purchased passage. "Not much out there but cattle and trouble." "Then trouble and I will become acquainted," Sophia had replied, clutching her small bundle of salvaged belongings. The journey was punishing. 7 days of jolting travel through increasingly rugged terrain, squashed between a traveling salesman who smelled of tobacco and a minister's wife, who seemed to believe Sophia's Spanish heritage made her in particular need of salvation. When the stagecoach finally creaked to a halt in the dusty main street of Weaverville, Wyoming territory, Sophia stepped down on unsteady legs, her dark hair matted with travel dust and her once fine dress hanging limply on her frame. She'd lost weight since the flood, grief consuming her as surely as hunger. Weaverville wasn't much to look at: a single street lined with weathered buildings, a saloon doing brisk business despite the early hour, and a general store that made her heart ache with memories. The town sat nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills that would turn golden in summer but now, in early spring, were a tentative green. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, already tossing down her small bag. Sophia caught it clumsily. "Is there a boarding house?" she asked, squinting in the harsh sunlight. The driver pointed to a 2-story building with peeling white paint. "Mrs. Thornton's. $5 a week, meals included, only respectable place for a lady, $5. Sophia fingered the remaining coins in her pocket. That would leave her with exactly $3.47 to rebuild her entire life. She nodded her thanks and made her way to the boarding house, trying to ignore the curious stares of the townspeople. Mrs. Thornton was a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair pulled back so severely it gave her the appearance of perpetual surprise. She looked Sophia up and down with undisguised suspicion. "Single women don't last long in Weaverville," she said bluntly. "Unless they're working at the saloon, and I don't house that sort." "I am not that sort," Sophia replied, her Spanish accent more pronounced in her fatigue. "I am looking for honest work. I ran my father's store for years. I can keep books, order inventory, serve customers. Can you now, Mrs. Thornton interrupted, her expression softening slightly. "Well, we'll see. I'll need $3 now for your first week. Back room, 2nd floor, breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. You miss it, you go hungry." By the next morning, Sophia had scrubbed the travel grime from her skin, mended the worst tears in her dress, and tied back her thick, dark hair with a ribbon salvaged from the flood. She looked presentable enough, she hoped, to find employment. What she hadn't counted on was the cool reception from the town's business owners. The general store already had a clerk. The dress shop didn't need another seamstress. The hotel manager took one look at her dark complexion and suggested she try the kitchen instead, which was already fully staffed. By midday, desperation was setting in. She stood outside the saloon for a full 5 minutes, debating whether her pride was worth her survival, when a commotion down the street caught her attention. A wagon had pulled up in front of the livery stable, driven by a man with a young boy beside him. "Got him, Nit Jackson, I told you to hold those reins tighter," the man shouted as one of the horses reared. "Now look at this mess." The wagon was loaded with supplies that had shifted during the journey, and now boxes and barrels threatened to topple into the street. The boy, who couldn't be more than 10 years old, looked close to tears as he tried to help his father stabilize the load. Without thinking, Sophia hurried over, catching a sliding crate before it could fall. "Easy now," she said to the startled horse, reaching for its bridle with her free hand. Years of helping unload deliveries at her father's store had taught her how to calm nervous animals. The man turned, clearly surprised to see a woman in a faded dress holding back his horse with one hand and a heavy crate with the other. He was tall and weathered, with sandy hair that curled slightly where it met the collar of his faded work shirt. His face was tanned from long days outdoors, with lines that spoke of hard work and worry, but his eyes were a startling green that assessed her quickly. "Much obliged, miss," he said, taking the crate from her and setting it safely on the ground. "Grady Donovan, this is my boy, Jackson." The boy nodded shyly, his dark hair falling across eyes that matched his father's. He looked nothing like the man otherwise, and Sophia wondered briefly about his mother. "Sophia Vallejo," she replied. "Do you need help unloading? I am stronger than I look." Grady raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't be proper to have a lady doing heavy lifting. Besides, these supplies need to get out to our place before nightfall. Come on, Jackson, let's get this wagon straightened out." Jackson scrambled to help, but it was clear the boy was small for his age and struggling with the weight of the crates. Sophia watched for a moment, then stepped forward again. "Mr. Donovan, I am in need of work," she said plainly. "I can help you unload now, and perhaps you know of someone in town who might hire me. I have experience in shopkeeping, bookkeeping, cooking, you knew in town." He interrupted, grunting as he heaved a barrel back into place. "Just arrived yesterday, from Colorado." Something in her voice must have betrayed her circumstances because Grady paused and looked at her more carefully. "Colorado had bad flooding this spring, that why you're here?" Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. The kindness in his question threatened to break the composure she'd maintained since arriving in Weaverville. Grady seemed to come to a decision. "Jackson, run over to Harmon's and get those nails I ordered. Miss Vallejo and I will finish loading." As soon as the boy was out of earshot, Grady turned to her. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but you seem like you've had a rough time. Lost folks in that flood, my father," she said quietly, "and our store, everything." He nodded as if this confirmed something. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I know something about that kind of pain." He gestured to his son in the distance. "Jackson's mother died bringing him into this world, been just the two of us ever since." They worked in silence for a few minutes, Sophia helping to redistribute the weight of the supplies more evenly in the wagon. Despite his initial protest, Grady didn't stop her from lifting the lighter crates. "Truth is," he said finally, "I could use some help out at my place, nothing improper," he added hastily, seeing her expression. "I've got a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Trying to raise cattle, but it's hard to manage with just me and the boy. Been thinking about hiring help, but ranch hands are scarce and expensive." "I know nothing about cattle," Sophia admitted, "but you know about keeping books, you said, and cooking." When she nodded, he continued. "Jackson's getting to an age where he needs proper schooling, not just what I can teach him in the evenings. I've been meaning to bring him into town more regular, but can't leave the ranch unattended. You are offering me a position, room and board, plus $5 a week," Grady said. "You'd help with the house, the cooking, keep the books straight. Jackson could use some help with his letters too, and I'd be in town every week for supplies so you wouldn't be stranded out there." It wasn't what she'd imagined when she came to Weaverville, but it was honest work with a roof over her head. And something about Grady Donovan's straightforward manner and the boy's shy smile made the offer more appealing than it might have been otherwise. "When would you want me to start?" Sophia asked, already calculating how to explain to Mrs. Thornton that she'd be leaving after just one night. "Today, if you're willing." We're headed back once we finish loading up. You can get your things and ride out with us." He paused. "Unless you have other arrangements." Sophia looked down the dusty main street of Weaverville at the faces that had turned her away all morning, and then back at Grady Donovan, who was offering her a chance when she most needed one. "I will need to collect my belongings," she said. "It will not take long." An hour later, with her small bag secured in the back of the wagon, Sophia found herself perched on the seat beside Jackson, who had initially been shy but was now peppering her with questions about Colorado and her journey west. Grady drove the team with capable hands, occasionally interjecting when his son's curiosity became too personal. "Jackson, give Miss Vallejo a moment to breathe," he said with a gentle cuff to the boy's shoulder. "She's had a long journey." "It's quite all right," Sophia assured him. "I do not mind the questions, and please call me Sophia." The road out of Weaverville quickly gave way to open country, the wagon bouncing over ruts and stones. The landscape was beautiful in its ruggedness, vast stretches of prairie grass dotted with wildflowers, rolling hills in the distance, and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees marking the path of a creek. "It's not much," Grady said apologetically as they crested a rise and his ranch came into view. "But it's ours." A modest cabin sat in a small valley with a barn and corral beside it. A creek wound its way past the structures, lined with willows and cottonwoods. In the distance, Sophia could see cattle grazing on the hillsides. It was simple, certainly, but there was a peaceful beauty to it that touched something inside her. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Grady looked surprised, then pleased. "Well, we like it. Land's got good water, decent grass. Been here 6 years now, building it up slow and steady." As they drew closer, Sophia could see that the cabin, while small, had been built with care. The logs were well chinked against the weather, and someone had planted flowers along one side, though they looked a bit neglected. "Ma planted those," Jackson said, following her gaze. "Pa says she loved flowers." "Your father tends them well," Sophia said diplomatically, noting how Grady's shoulders tensed at the mention of his late wife. "Not well enough," he muttered. "Never could get them to thrive like she did." They pulled up to the cabin, and Grady jumped down to help Sophia from the wagon. His hand was rough with calluses but gentle as he guided her to the ground. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the leather and sunshine on his skin before he stepped back awkwardly. "Jackson, show Sophia where to put her things while I unload the wagon." The inside of the cabin was surprisingly spacious, with one large main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, and 2 small bedrooms off to one side. It was tidy but clearly in need of a woman's touch. The curtains were faded, dishes were stacked haphazardly on shelves, and the furnishings were functional but sparse. "That's Pa's room," Jackson said, pointing to one door. "And that's mine, but Pa says you're to have it and I'm to sleep on the pallet by the fire." "Oh, I couldn't take your room," Sophia protested. "Pa says it ain't proper otherwise," Jackson replied with the certainty of a child repeating an adult's words. "And Pa's always proper, even when the other ranchers tease him for it." Before Sophia could question this further, Grady entered with her bag. "Jackson, go help unload the supplies. I need to speak with Sophia about her duties." When they were alone, Grady cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I know it's not much, especially compared to what you might be used to, but Mr. Donovan," Sophia interrupted gently. 3 days ago, I was clinging to a piece of wood in a flood that took everything I owned and the only family I had left. This is far more than I expected to have so soon." His expression softened. "Grady, please, if we're going to be living under the same roof, seems right we use our Christian names." "Grady," she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. He seemed to collect himself. "Right, well, as for your duties." "Cooking, cleaning, mending the usual household things. I've been keeping the ranch books, such as they are, but I'd be grateful if you'd take a look. Never was good with numbers. And Jackson's schooling, he can read some and does simple sums. But he needs more if he's ever to make something of himself beyond this ranch. The school in town only runs 3 months of the year, and we can't always get there even then." "I will help him," Sophia promised. "My father insisted I be educated properly, even though many thought it wasteful for a daughter." Grady nodded approvingly. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, she said, the simple past tense still a knife to her heart. Something in her expression must have revealed her pain because Grady's weathered face softened. The first year's the hardest, he said quietly. It gets easier, though it never goes away completely. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding that felt almost intimate. Then Jackson burst through the door, breaking the spell. Pa, one of the heifers is out again, saw her heading for the south pasture, Grady sighed. That would be troublemaker, never met a fence she couldn't figure out. Excuse me, Sophia, duty calls. He grabbed his hat from a peg by the door. Make yourself at home, we'll be back for supper. Left alone in the cabin, Sophia took a deep breath and surveyed her new domain. There was work to be done, certainly, but for the first time since the floodwaters had risen, she felt a tiny spark of hope. This wasn't the life she had planned, but perhaps it could be a life worth living. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work. The days fell into a rhythm at the Donovan ranch. Sophia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Grady and Jackson before they headed out to tend the cattle. The mornings she spent cleaning, baking bread, and tending the small kitchen garden she'd started behind the cabin. Afternoons were devoted to Jackson's lessons when he could be spared from ranch work, and in the evenings, she prepared dinner while Grady cleaned up after a day's hard labor. It was a simple existence, but Sophia found unexpected contentment in it. The grief for her father and their lost life in Colorado was still a constant ache, but the physical work and the company of Grady and Jackson gave her less time to dwell on what couldn't be changed. Grady, she discovered, was a man of few words but deep feelings. He worked from sunrise to sunset, his dedication to building something for his son evident in everything he did. Though not formally educated, he was intelligent and curious, often asking Sophia about the books she was teaching Jackson from and sometimes joining them for lessons when ranch work permitted. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Sophia was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the distinctive sound of a guitar being tuned. Following the music, she found Grady sitting on a stump near the corral, Jackson at his feet, as the rancher's fingers moved skillfully over the strings. She stayed back, not wanting to intrude as Grady began to play a melancholy tune. His voice, when he sang, was surprisingly rich and expressive, a stark contrast to his usual taciturn manner. My love lies under the willow tree where I laid her down to rest, he sang, the words carried on the evening breeze. The angels came and took her home, though I begged them for the best. Jackson leaned against his father's knee, eyes closed, clearly familiar with this ritual. The song continued, telling the story of a man left to raise his son alone, promising his departed love that he would keep the boy safe and teach him to be a good man. Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes. The raw emotion in Grady's voice spoke of a grief still fresh despite the years that had passed. As the final notes faded, she must have made a sound because Grady looked up, startled to find her watching. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I did not mean to intrude. Grady set the guitar aside, his expression closing off. It's nothing, just an old habit. It was beautiful, Sophia said softly. Your wife would be proud of how you've raised Jackson. A complex emotion crossed his face, pain, gratitude, and something else she couldn't identify. Emma loved music, he said after a moment. Played the piano before we came west, always said she'd teach Jackson when he was old enough. So you taught him instead, Sophia guessed, trying to. Boy's got a good ear, better than mine. Grady ruffled his son's hair affectionately. Pa plays every Wednesday, Jackson informed her. It was Ma's favorite day, says it keeps her memory alive. A lovely tradition, Sophia said. She hesitated, then added, my father and I would light a candle every Sunday for my mother. He said as long as we remembered her, she was never truly gone. Grady nodded, a look of understanding passing between them. Your father was right. Supper will be ready soon, Sophia said, reluctant to break the moment but conscious of the stew simmering on the stove. We'll be along directly, Grady replied, already reaching for his guitar again. As Sophia walked back to the cabin, the haunting melody followed her, stirring emotions she'd been trying to keep at bay. She missed her father with an ache that sometimes felt physical, and hearing Grady's tribute to his wife had opened that wound afresh. But there was comfort, too, in knowing she wasn't alone in her grief. That night, after Jackson had gone to bed, Sophia was surprised when Grady didn't immediately retire as well. Instead, he lingered at the table, nursing a cup of coffee and watching as she mended one of his shirts by the light of the oil lamp. "You've been good for this place," he said abruptly. "For Jackson, especially, boy's reading better already." Sophia smiled, pleased by the compliment. "He is a bright child, eager to learn." "Gets that from his mother," Grady said. "Emma was always reading something, improving herself. Said just because we lived in the wilderness didn't mean we had to think like wild things. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Grady traced the rim of his cup with one calloused finger. "Been thinking I haven't been fair to you, though." Sophia looked up, startled. "How so?" "Brought you out here with barely any time to consider. 5 miles might not seem far, but it's a long walk if you decided this life wasn't to your liking." He met her eyes directly. "Are you happy here, Sophia? Truly?" The question caught her off guard. Was she happy? Not completely. The loss of her father was too recent for that. But content, finding purpose again. "Yes, I am grateful to be here," she said carefully. "After the flood, I thought perhaps I would never feel at home anywhere again, but you and Jackson have been kind and the work suits me." Grady studied her face as if trying to read the truth behind her words. "That's not quite answering my question." Sophia set down her mending. "I lost everything, Grady. My father, our business, our home, even the town I grew up in feels lost to me now. Happiness seems like asking for too much too soon. But here I feel useful, needed. It is enough for now." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But if that changes, if you decide you want to try your luck back in town or somewhere else, you tell me. I'll make sure you get where you need to go." "Thank you," she said, touched by his concern, "but I have no plans to leave." Something like relief flickered across his face. "Good, that's good." The conversation shifted to more practical matters: the cattle market, plans for expanding the herd, Jackson's upcoming birthday. But something had changed between them. A subtle shift in understanding that left Sophia feeling both unsettled and strangely hopeful. Spring melted into summer, and the ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Grady, Jackson, and Sophia. The kitchen garden produced an abundance of vegetables, the cattle grew fat on the rich summer grass, and Jackson progressed so well in his studies that Grady spoke of sending him to the proper school in town come fall. Sophia found herself increasingly invested in the ranch's success. She'd taken over the account books completely, discovering that while Grady was a hardworking rancher, his bookkeeping had been haphazard at best. Under her management, they began to see where money could be saved and better invested. One hot July afternoon, Sophia was carefully copying figures into the ledger when Grady burst into the cabin, his face alight with excitement. "The offer came through," he announced, waving a letter. "Jenkins is selling us his north pasture at the price we offered." Sophia jumped up, sharing his enthusiasm. They'd been negotiating for the adjacent land for weeks, knowing it would allow them to increase the herd significantly. "That's wonderful news," she exclaimed. "With the profit projections we calculated, we should be able to pay it off within 2 years." Grady repeated, his smile fading slightly as he looked at her. "You talk as if this ranch is yours too," Sophia faltered, suddenly conscious of her presumption. "I apologize, I only meant—" "No," he interrupted, moving closer. "Don't apologize, I just realized something." He set the letter down on the table. "When Emma died, I thought this place would always feel like half a home, but lately, it started to feel whole again." The intensity in his green eyes made Sophia's heart beat faster. They'd worked side by side for months now, sharing meals and conversation, gradually learning each other's habits and preferences. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, the solid reliability of him, the rare but treasured sound of his laughter. But this was the first time he'd spoken so directly about what her presence meant to him. "I'm glad," she said softly. Grady took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Sophia, the door banged open as Jackson raced in. Pa Ryder coming." "Looks like Sheriff Miller." The moment shattered. Grady's expression shifted instantly to concern as he moved to the window. "So it is. Wonder what brings him all the way out here." Sheriff Miller was a stout man with a bushy mustache and perpetually suspicious eyes. He dismounted stiffly, nodding to Grady as he approached. "Donovan," he greeted. "Miss Vallejo." Sophia was surprised he knew her name, as she'd only been to town a handful of times since coming to the ranch. "Sheriff," Grady replied, "what can we do for you?" Miller removed his hat, revealing a sweat-stained forehead. "Got a situation in town I thought you should know about. Man came through yesterday asking questions about a Spanish woman who might have arrived this spring. Seems mighty interested in finding her." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. "What man? Did he give a name?" Called himself Victor Reynolds. "Said he was looking for his fiancée who ran off after some trouble in Colorado." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That you he's looking for Miss Vallejo." "I have never been engaged," Sophia said firmly, though her hands trembled. "And I know no Victor Reynolds." Grady moved to stand beside her, his presence reassuring. "What exactly did this man want?" Said the lady stole some valuables before she left Colorado. "Wants to recover them and bring her back to face charges." "That's absurd," Sophia exclaimed. "I lost everything in the flood, my father, our store, all we owned. What could I possibly have stolen?" Sheriff Miller shrugged. "Can't say. But he's offering a reward for information leading to your whereabouts. Thought you should know before someone in town decides that reward sounds tempting." "Thank you for the warning," Grady said grimly. After the sheriff departed, Sophia sank into a chair, her mind racing. "I don't understand. Why would someone claim I stole anything? Why would anyone be looking for me at all?" Grady's expression was troubled. "Could be someone who knows you survived the flood and figures you're vulnerable. Easy target for false accusations if you have no one to vouch for you." "But why?" Sophia pressed. "What would be the purpose? Money, maybe, or—" Grady hesitated. "Were there men in your town who showed particular interest in you, someone who might have taken rejection poorly?" Sophia thought back. There had been Harold Blackstone, the banker's son, who had made his intentions clear despite her father's disapproval. And Thomas Wilkes, a customer who had often lingered in the store, asking personal questions that made her uncomfortable. "A few," she admitted. "But nothing serious enough to warrant this." Grady paced the small room, thinking. "This puts us in a difficult position. If this Reynolds fellow is determined, he might track you here eventually. And a single woman living with a widower and his son, some might consider that improper enough to believe other accusations." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sophia's reputation, and by extension Grady's, could be compromised. In a small frontier community, reputation was everything. "Perhaps I should return to town," Sophia suggested reluctantly. "Find employment there where I would be more visible, less susceptible to rumors." "No," Grady said sharply. Then more gently, "No, you belong here now, we'll find another solution." Jackson, who had been listening wide-eyed to the conversation, piped up. "Pa, why don't you just marry Sophia? Then nobody could take her away." A profound silence fell over the cabin. Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks as Grady stared at his son in astonishment. "Jackson, that's not—" Grady began, then stopped, looking at Sophia with an expression she couldn't interpret. "That's not something to suggest lightly." "But you like each other," Jackson persisted. "I see how you look at her when you think nobody's watching. And Sophia smiles different when she's talking to you than when she talks to me." "Jackson," Sophia said weakly, "marriage is a serious commitment, not something done just to solve a problem." "Actually," Grady said slowly, "the boy might have a point." Sophia's head snapped up to look at him. "What?" Grady ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable but pressing on. "A marriage, even one of convenience, would give you protection under the law that you don't have as a single woman. This Reynolds fellow couldn't force you to go anywhere if you were my wife. And it would silence any gossip about impropriety." "You cannot be serious," Sophia said, though a part of her was inexplicably thrilled at the suggestion. "I'm not proposing a real marriage," Grady clarified hastily. "Just a legal arrangement for protection. We'd continue as we have been, but you'd have my name and the security that comes with it." Despite his practical tone, something in his eyes belied the casualness of his words. There was a question there, a vulnerability that suggested this wasn't entirely about convenience. "And if this Reynolds is not the threat we fear?" Sophia asked. "If he moves on or never comes here at all?" Grady shrugged, attempting nonchalance. Then we'd have paperwork that doesn't much change our day-to-day lives, no harm done. No harm, Sophia repeated, testing the truth of it. And Jackson, how would he feel about such an arrangement? Are you kidding? Jackson exclaimed. It would be swell. You're already like family, Sophia. This would just make it official. Grady smiled at his son's enthusiasm. See, the boy approves. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the turmoil of emotions. A marriage of convenience was not what she had ever imagined for herself. Her parents had shared a deep and passionate love. Her father had never even looked at another woman after her mother's death. Could she settle for less? But looking at Grady's face, at the mixture of concern and something deeper in his eyes, Sophia wondered if this arrangement might eventually become more than convenience. There had been moments, brief but meaningful, when she'd caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. I will consider it, she said finally. It is not a decision to be made hastily. Grady nodded, relief evident in his expression. Of course, take all the time you need. That night, Sophia lay awake in her small room, turning the proposal over in her mind. Marriage to Grady Donovan. It would be a practical solution to a potential threat, yes. But could she bind herself to a man whose heart still belonged to his dead wife? A man who played mournful songs every Wednesday and kept Emma's memory alive in 100 small ways, and yet there was Jackson to consider. The boy had grown attached to her and she to him. She'd come to love teaching him, watching his mind expand with each new lesson. And there was the ranch itself, which had become her home in ways she hadn't expected. The thought of leaving brought an ache to her chest that surprised her with its intensity. As for Grady himself, Sophia turned her face into the pillow, allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings she'd been carefully avoiding. His steady presence had become essential to her days. She found herself looking forward to their conversations over dinner, to the quiet evenings when he would sometimes read aloud from one of the few books they owned. She admired his dedication to his son, his unwavering work ethic, the careful way he handled every living thing on the ranch. Was that enough to build a marriage on, even one that began as an arrangement of convenience? Sophia didn't know. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, she realized that the prospect of becoming Grady Donovan's wife, even in name only, filled her with more hope than trepidation. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching July day. Sophia rose early, her decision made. She would accept Grady's proposal with certain conditions they would need to discuss. But before she could speak to him, Jackson burst into the cabin, panic etched on his young face. "Pa's hurt," he cried. "The new stallion kicked him. He can't get up." Sophia dropped the bowl she was holding, barely registering the sound of it shattering as she ran toward the corral. Grady lay in the dirt, his face gray with pain, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Don't move," she commanded, kneeling beside him. "Jackson, bring water and clean cloths from the house. Quickly." Grady's eyes were clouded with pain, but he managed a weak smile. "Shoulda known that stallion was too wild to break. Getting too old for this, I guess." "Hush," Sophia said, gently examining him for other injuries. "You will be fine, but I think your leg is broken." Jackson returned with the water and cloths, his eyes wide with fear. "Is Pa going to die?" "No," Sophia said firmly, "but we need to get him to the doctor in town." "Can you ride to the Hendersons' ranch and ask Mr. Henderson to bring his wagon? Tell him it's urgent." As Jackson galloped off on their most reliable horse, Sophia carefully cleaned the dirt from a gash on Grady's forehead. "Some timing I have," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Ask a woman to marry me one day, get myself half killed the next." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Sophia felt a smile tugging at her lips. "I had decided to say yes," she told him softly, "though I think we will need to discuss terms when you are not in such pain." Grady's eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners despite his pain. "Well, that's something worth healing for, I'd say." The trip to town was agonizing for Grady, every bump in the road sending fresh waves of pain through his broken leg. By the time they reached Dr. Wilson's office, he was barely conscious. The doctor confirmed what Sophia already suspected: a clean break that would heal well if properly set, but would keep Grady off his feet for at least 6 weeks. "Who's going to run the ranch?" Grady asked weakly as the doctor prepared to set the bone. The summer roundup is coming, and that north pasture needs fencing before winter. We will manage, Sophia assured him, holding his hand. The Hendersons have already offered to help with the cattle, and Jackson knows the ranch as well as you do. Not the business side, Grady argued. The contracts, the planning. I can handle the business, Sophia said firmly. I have been keeping your books for months. Trust me, Grady, rest and heal. We will take care of everything else. The next weeks proved to be the most challenging of Sophia's time at the ranch. With Grady confined to bed in their cabin, she had to take on responsibilities she'd never imagined. She drove the wagon into town for supplies, negotiated with cattle buyers, and worked alongside the Henderson boys to begin the fencing of the new pasture. Jackson rose to the occasion magnificently, taking on many of his father's daily tasks and growing in confidence with each success. In the evenings, they would sit with Grady, recounting the day's accomplishments and challenges, making plans for the following day. Despite the difficulty, there was a strange joy in those weeks. Sophia discovered strength she hadn't known she possessed, and Grady, watching her competently manage what he had always considered his domain, looked at her with new respect and deepening affection. "You're a remarkable woman, Sophia Vallejo," he said one evening as she changed the bandage on his leg. "When you came here, I thought I was helping you. Turns out you're the one saving me." "We are helping each other," she corrected gently. "Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be?" "A partnership," Grady caught her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Is that still what you want?" "Even after seeing what a mess this ranch can be, more than ever," Sophia admitted, finally allowing herself to speak from the heart. "These past months. You and Jackson have become my family. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Something shifted in Grady's expression, a softening, a surrendering. "When Emma died, I thought that part of my life was over. Never expected to feel this way about anyone again." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not offering marriage just for convenience anymore, Sophia. I'm asking because I want you to be my wife, in every way." The honesty in his voice left no doubt about his meaning. Sophia felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away from his intense gaze. "In that case," she said softly, "my answer is still yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Jackson as their witness, Reverend Thomas officiating, and the Hendersons and a few other neighboring families in attendance. Sophia wore a new dress of deep blue calico, purchased with money she'd earned from selling her preserves in town, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jackson had picked that morning. The threat of Victor Reynolds still loomed. There had been reports of him asking questions in nearby towns, but on her wedding day, Sophia refused to let fear overshadow her happiness. She was no longer alone and unprotected. She was Sophia Donovan now, with a husband, a son, and a home that was truly hers. That night, after the guests had departed and Jackson was asleep, Grady took her hand and led her to what was now their bedroom. His leg was still healing, requiring him to use a crutch, but he moved with determination. "I want you to know," he said, closing the door behind them, "that I never expected to find love again. After Emma, I thought that part of me died with her." He touched Sophia's cheek gently. "But you brought something back to life in me, in this home. And you gave me a new beginning when I thought everything was lost," Sophia replied, leaning into his touch. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Despite his injury, Grady proved a passionate and considerate lover, and Sophia discovered desires she had never acknowledged even to herself. Afterward, lying in his arms as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, Sophia felt a peace she hadn't known since before the flood. This was not the life she had planned, but it was a good life, one built from the ruins of tragedy but reaching toward something beautiful and enduring. "What are you thinking?" Grady murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of something better," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and deepening love. By August, Grady was back on his feet, though he still favored his injured leg. Together with Jackson, they brought in the summer hay expanded the cattle herd, and completed the fencing of the north pasture. The threat of Victor Reynolds faded as weeks passed with no further sightings or inquiries. Sophia began to believe they had escaped whatever scheme he had been planning. Her life settled into a rhythm of work and joy that made the horror of the spring flood seem like a distant nightmare. One crisp September morning, as Sophia was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw a group of riders coming down the trail toward the ranch. 3 men, moving with purpose. Her heart stuttered with fear. One of the men in the lead had the bearing of someone used to getting his way. Could it be Reynolds, finally tracking her down? "Grady," she called, her voice sharp with alarm. He appeared from the barn instantly, reading the concern in her face and following her gaze to the approaching riders. Without a word, he went to the cabin and returned with his rifle, positioning himself between Sophia and the newcomers. As the riders drew closer, however, Sophia realized with shock that she recognized the lead rider. Not as Victor Reynolds, but as Harold Blackstone, the banker's son from Riverton. "Mrs. Donovan," Harold called as they reined in their horses. "Or should I say Miss Vallejo? I've been looking for you for quite some time." "My wife has nothing to say to you," Grady replied, his rifle not quite aimed at the men but held ready. "State your business and move on." Harold smiled unpleasantly. "Your wife, is it? How convenient. I wonder if she told you about the money she took when she fled Riverton, money that belongs to my father's bank." "I took nothing," Sophia exclaimed. "Everything was lost in the flood, everything." "Not according to our ledgers," Harold countered smoothly. $500 was withdrawn the day before the flood, signed for by you," Sophia gasped. "That's a lie, I made no such withdrawal." Grady's expression hardened. "I suggest you and your friends leave our property, Mr. Blackstone." "Now, not without what's owed," Harold insisted. $500 plus interest, or Mrs. Donovan comes back to Riverton to face charges." Suddenly, Sophia understood. "This is about the land, isn't it? My father's property. You bought it for a fraction of its worth after the flood, and now you're trying to extort even more money from me." Harold's expression confirmed her suspicion. "The land was fairly purchased. This is a separate matter." "There was no withdrawal," Sophia said firmly. "Check the signature again." "It wasn't mine." A tense silence fell over the yard. Then a new voice spoke. "I believe the lady is telling the truth." All heads turned to see Sheriff Miller approaching on horseback, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older man Sophia didn't recognize. "This is Judge Harmon from Denver," the sheriff explained, dismounting. "He's been investigating a series of frauds committed by bank employees in several towns affected by the spring floods. Seems some folks saw opportunity in tragedy." The judge fixed Harold with a stern look. "Mr. Blackstone, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Your father is already in custody in Denver." The color drained from Harold's face. "This is preposterous. You have no proof on the contrary," the judge interrupted. "We have substantial evidence, including forged withdrawal slips from multiple flood victims, and now we can add attempted extortion to the charges." As Sheriff Miller and his deputy took Harold and his companions into custody, Sophia leaned against Grady, suddenly weak with relief. "How did you know?" she asked the judge. "How did you find me?" "Credit your husband for that," Judge Harmon replied with a smile. "When he heard rumors of a man asking about you, he wrote to the authorities in Denver, suggesting there might be a connection to fraud following the floods. That letter reached my desk, and the investigation was already underway." Sophia turned to Grady in surprise. "You never told me." "Didn't want to worry you unnecessarily," he admitted, "but I wasn't about to let anyone threaten you, especially with lies." As the sheriff led the prisoners away, promising to return later for formal statements, Grady pulled Sophia into his arms. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "Truly over now." And it was. With Harold Blackstone's arrest, the last shadow of Sophia's past was lifted. The land in Riverton was eventually restored to her ownership through the court, and she and Grady decided to sell it, using the proceeds to further expand their ranch operations. By the following spring, almost exactly a year after the flood that had taken everything from her, Sophia had news that completed her journey from devastation to joy. "I'm going to have a baby." she told Grady one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. His face transformed with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the reality of the word. "Our baby." Jackson, when told the news, was equally thrilled, already planning all the things he would teach his little brother or sister. That night, as Sophia lay in bed beside her husband, she thought about the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she had clung to a piece of debris in a raging flood, certain that everything worth living for was lost. Now she had a husband who adored her, a son who filled her days with laughter, a prosperous ranch, and a new life growing inside her. "What are you smiling about?" Grady asked, pulling her closer. "I was thinking about how sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we truly need," Sophia replied. "The flood took all I had, but it also brought me here, to you and Jackson." Grady's arms tightened around her. "When you first came here, you said you weren't looking for happiness, just to feel useful again. I remember." "And now," he asked softly, "are you happy, Sophia Donovan?" She placed his hand over the spot where their child grew, a tangible symbol of their love and future. "Completely," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." 6 months later, on a warm autumn day, Sophia gave birth to a healthy boy they named Gabriel after her father. As she held her son in her arms, with Grady and Jackson crowded beside her on the bed, their faces alight with love and wonder, Sophia felt the circle of her life complete itself. The floodwaters that had once threatened to drown her had instead carried her to this place, this family, this love. From the depths of loss, she had found not just survival, but a life overflowing with blessings she could never have imagined. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Donovan ranch. The cattle business flourished under Grady and Sophia's combined management, allowing them to add more land and build a larger, more comfortable home as their family grew. Gabriel was joined by a sister, Elena, 2 years later, and another brother, Michael, 3 years after that. Jackson, now a young man of 18, had grown into a thoughtful, capable rancher with his father's work ethic and his stepmother's love of learning. With the family's encouragement, he began taking courses at the college in Denver during the winter months, studying modern agricultural methods that he brought back to implement on the ranch. Through it all, the story of how they became a family was passed down to the children, the tale of a devastating flood, a journey west, and how a poor cowboy father had given everything to a woman who had lost all she had. "But that's not quite right," Sophia would correct when Grady told it that way. "We gave each other everything. That's what makes our story so beautiful." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grady surprised Sophia by taking her to a secluded spot on their property where he had planted a grove of fruit trees, apple, pear, and cherry that were now beginning to bear fruit. "I wanted to create something lasting," he explained as they walked among the blossoming trees, "something that would grow stronger each year like our love." Sophia, deeply touched, reached up to kiss him. At 42, Grady's sandy hair was now streaked with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to her, he was more handsome than ever, his face marked by years of laughter and a life well lived. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me? Taking on my troubles when you already had enough of your own?" Grady looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Sophia, bringing you into our lives was the best decision I ever made. You didn't just save the ranch when I was injured, you saved me. Brought me back to life when I was just going through the motions." He took her hands in his expression earnest. "That flood may have taken everything you had, but it brought you to us, and I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift." As they walked back to the house where their children waited to celebrate with them, Sophia reflected on the unpredictable course of her life. From the daughter of a Spanish immigrant shopkeeper in Colorado, to a destitute flood survivor, to the beloved wife of a Wyoming rancher and mother to 4 children, each turn had seemed like fate's cruelty at the time, only to reveal itself as a blessing in disguise. The Donovan Ranch was now one of the most prosperous in the county, known for its quality cattle and the warm hospitality of its owners. The community that had once viewed Sophia with suspicion had embraced her completely, and she had become a respected figure, serving on the school board and organizing assistance for families facing hardship. Life would still bring challenges: harsh winters, market fluctuations, the inevitable sorrows and joys of raising children, but Sophia faced each day with the quiet strength that had carried her through the floodwaters all those years ago. Each spring, when the creeks rose with melting snow and rain, Sophia would stand on the porch of their home, watching the water flow past with respect but no longer fear. The flood that had once threatened to destroy her had instead carried her to everything she now cherished. And each day, in the love of her husband and children, in the prosperity of the land they tended, Sophia found the truth of what Grady had promised her so long ago: that sometimes from the greatest loss comes the most precious gain. In the years that followed, as their children grew and started families of their own, the Donovan Ranch became the center of a sprawling, loving clan. Jackson eventually married the schoolteacher from Weaverville and built a home on the eastern section of the ranch. Gabriel, with his father's talent for working with horses, developed a successful breeding operation that complemented the cattle business. Elena, who had inherited her mother's head for figures, managed the financial aspects of the ranch while raising 3 children of her own. And Michael, the youngest, combined his father's love of the land with his mother's entrepreneurial spirit to expand into sheep raising on the high pastures. Through all the changes and growth, Grady and Sophia remained the heart of the family, their love a foundation that supported everything else. Even into their 60s, they could be found working side by side, her dark hair now streaked with silver, his almost completely white, but their eyes still bright with the same devotion that had sustained them through decades together. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from across the county, Grady surprised Sophia by unveiling a small monument he had commissioned for the ranch, a simple stone marker inscribed with words that brought tears to her eyes. From the floods of loss came the greatest blessing of all: family, love, and a life beyond imagining. Grady and Sophia Donovan, united by fate, bound by choice, 1874. As the extended Donovan family celebrated long into the night, Sophia stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the generations that had sprung from that desperate moment when a flood had washed away everything she thought mattered, only to deliver her to everything that truly did. Grady found her there, slipping his arm around her waist with the familiar comfort of 40 years of marriage. "What are you thinking about, my love?" he asked, his voice still strong despite his 75 years. Sophia leaned against him, grateful for his enduring strength. "I was thinking about rivers," she said softly. "How they can destroy in their fury but also carry us to places we would never have found on our own." Grady nodded, understanding as he always did. "The flood brought you to us, but it was your courage that built this life, Sophia. Never forget that." As they stood together under the star-filled Wyoming sky, surrounded by the legacy they had created from loss and love, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain had been worth it for the lifetime of joy that followed. The poor cowboy father had indeed given her everything in return for what she had lost: not just material security, but a love that had transformed devastation into the most beautiful life she could have imagined. And in the end, that was the true miracle of their story.